When a person thinks of evil, he or she usually thinks of things like dark, demented, hell, fire, brimstone. One usually doesn't think water. But according to several witnesses, police even, back in 1983, evil showed up as water. The world has heard of the case of Donnie Decker repeatedly. It's been featured on Unsolved Mysteries, Paranormal Witness, and several other television shows. The internet and YouTube have been inundated with reports about the Donnie Decker case. But with all of that, the truth seems to have been lost somewhere in the mix. Believe it or not, there are many opposing reports as to what really happened. Amy looked into several of these conflicting bits of information, and most of what's going around seems to have just been fabricated out of thin air. And over the years, this story has become more and more fantastical. But that doesn't necessarily mean that the original case was a hoax. In this video, we're going to be re-examining the Donnie Decker case, and we're going to stick very closely to witness testimony. We'll start with the funeral that Donnie went to and the powerful emotions that he claimed was raging deep inside of him. And then we'll cover the strange, seemingly impossible events that several witnesses swore took place, including police. Then stay with us for our Fact or Fiction segment. There, we'll take a look at what some of the debunkers have had to say over the years, and we'll see if there's enough merit to their arguments to dismiss the case. Then Amy is going to come on, and she's going to share information that she found from the 1500s about some ancient spirits that supposedly have control over water. So, this report begins in a broken home. It's sad, really, the abuse that some kids go through. Donnie's story goes all the way back to the 1960s. Shortly after he was born, he started suffering abuse, and from a very young age, he began making bad choices. By the time he was a teenager, he was definitely hanging out with the wrong crowd. And because of the paranormal nature of this report, I think it's important to note that there's evidence that some of the people he associated with were heavily into black magic. Well, his home life continued to deteriorate, and before or shortly after his 18th birthday, he had a falling out with his mother, and then at some point he was arrested and sentenced to 1 year in prison for possessing stolen property. And then, in February of 1983, his grandfather, James Kishpa, died of cirrhosis of the liver, and since Donnie wasn't considered a danger to society or a flight risk, he was granted a weekend furlough to attend his grandfather's funeral. Donnie, of course, took the furlough, but he really didn't want to go. See, a large part of his childhood abuse had come from his grandfather. The main condition of the furlough, however, was that he must attend the funeral, so he did go. But according to Donnie, that's really where all of this crazy paranormal stuff began. As he sat there listening to all of these people speaking so highly of a monster who had been so abusive to him during his childhood, something started happening deep inside of Donnie.
It was as if a war was raging inside of me, between good and evil.
These memories of what his grandfather had done to him so many years ago stayed with him as he left the ceremony. His furlough didn't require him to return to prison until the end of the weekend, so he stayed with a couple of friends that night, Bob and Jeannie Kiefer. Donnie said that as he was walking up the staircase on his way to wash up for dinner, a powerful evil feeling came over him and saturated his entire body. And while he was in the bathroom, some invisible force attacked him, and then he saw what some people might consider the devil.
I turned to get the towel to wipe my hands, and then all of the air went out of the room. It was like being in a vacuum. It was very cold. Then I felt something was attacking me, trying to hurt me. I looked toward the window. It was a face. It looked like an old man wearing a crown.
Right then, he felt a terrible pain as something invisible gouged into his arm, leaving 3 slash marks just below his elbow.
I looked down and I saw 3 scratches going on my arm with big droplets of blood. I was confused, scared. I didn't know why this was happening.
A little later at the dinner table, Bob said that Donnie did not look at all normal. He said it looked as if all of the blood had drained from Donnie's face and as if he were in pain, so he paid closer attention. And then at some point, he saw those 3 slash marks on Donnie's arm.
I said, "Donnie, what did you do to yourself?" He looked at me. He said, "Bob, I didn't do it." He said, "I swear to God, there was a face in the bathroom window staring at me." He said it looked like the devil.
This was strange. Bob and Jeannie had lived in that house for a good little spell before that day, and nothing like this had ever happened before. Perplexed, but hungry, the family ate their dinner and then they moved into the living room. But that's when the really weird stuff began. After dinner, everyone moved into the living room, and as they were all visiting and watching television, the temperature suddenly dropped. Well, a few minutes later, Jeannie looked up and she noticed that little drips of water were running down one of the walls, so she pointed it out to her husband, and he puzzled. This was strange, because there were no water pipes in this area of the house. Where was the water coming from? Well, shortly after this, everyone was standing up taking a closer look at this water, and as they watched, these small drips started running together, and before long, they became pretty wide streams of water running down this wall. But there was also something else odd about the water. It looked strangely thick, so Bob got curious, and then he reached out and touched it.
It wasn't water as you know water. You'd rub your fingers on it. It was sticky, tacky feeling. It wasn't water.
As Bob was examining this water, there was a sudden loud noise from upstairs, and at that moment, water droplets began falling from everywhere. They were falling from the ceiling, they were running down the walls, and seemingly coming out of nowhere.
They were strange drops, and they were moving very fast.
Bob thought about it, and it really didn't make any sense. The logical next step, of course, was to go upstairs and find out where all of this water was coming from. But a strange feeling came over Bob, and he did not want to go upstairs, and in his own house even. He reflected later that what was running through his mind was what Donnie had told him that he had seen in the bathroom window. Donnie also told him about his grandfather and how abusive he had been and the strange spiritual war that Donnie felt raging deep inside of him while he was at the funeral. Was the spirit of Donnie's dead grandfather somehow here in Bob's house? No, surely that wasn't right. Since he was renting the house instead of going upstairs and investigating this thing himself, Bob decided that he would call the property owner and bring him in on whatever this was that was going on. So he called his landlord, a man named Ron Van Wy. And Mr. Van Wy, of course, wanted to know what was the reason that Bob wanted him to come out to his house so late in the evening. But Bob just really didn't know how to tell him without his landlord thinking that he was crazy. So he simply said, "Well, you really just need to come out here and check this out for yourself." Hearing the urgency in Bob's voice, Mr. Van Wy and his wife made the trip to Bob's house, and he said later that when he arrived, it was as if it was raining in the living room. Mr. Van Wy, who had not been there earlier when Donnie had told Bob about seeing that demonic old man in the bathroom window, decided that, well, they needed to go upstairs and try to figure this thing out. So the landlord headed up first, and Bob reluctantly followed. Strangely, both Bob and Mr. Van Wy later said that while they were up there, it felt extremely creepy and unnatural.
It just felt like something evil, some kind of spirit was upstairs in our house at that time. There was something up there. I could feel it. Couldn't see it, but something was up there.
After they checked the pipes and found that they were all dry, they came back downstairs and saw that the rain had actually intensified. And unbelievably, as the landlord was standing there studying this whole thing, a water droplet just materialized out of nowhere right in front of him. And then instead of dropping to the floor like it should have, it shot straight up and hit the ceiling. It was then that Bob looked over and noticed Donnie.
Don was sitting on the couch. I looked over at him. It looked like he was 1,000 miles away in his head. No response to the TV, no response to calling his name. He was there, but he wasn't there.
Bob went over to Donnie and started snapping his fingers and waving his hands in front of his face and calling his name, but Donnie was completely unresponsive. Not knowing what else to do, Bob and Mr. Van Wy decided to call the police. Patrol Officer John Bowsen, who was working the night shift, answered the phone, and he immediately recognized Bob's voice.
Bob was a guy I knew from around town, a generally nice individual. I didn't know him as the type to exaggerate, so when Bob said that he had a problem, I listened.
Bob told Officer Bowsen that there was a problem at his house and that he needed him there right away. A short while later, the officer arrived. He came into the house and then stepped into the living room.
Within seconds of entering that room, I had this cold feeling. Bob says, "Yeah, this is what I'm talking about." And I got it immediately.
Then Officer Bowsen looked around and saw the water.
Droplets would come from the floor, absolutely defying gravity.
The two men just stood there for a moment, looking at each other as Officer Bowsen did his best to comprehend what he was seeing.
We're literally standing several feet apart, face to face, when all of a sudden, this drop materializes between us.
The drop looked big. It looked like it was meant for us to see it.
This drop flew through the living room, through the dining room, and then out into the darkness in the kitchen.
Everyone in the room saw this droplet fly sideways through the air, and then they all turned to Officer Bowsen.
I was the officer on the scene, and everyone was looking to me for a sense of direction and what to do. I had no answers for them.
Just as perplexed as everyone else, Officer Bowsen called out another officer, and a few moments later, Patrolman Richard Walbert arrived, and when he stepped into the house, well, he said he felt it too. Donnie Decker was sitting on the couch in some type of strange trance. Water was falling from everywhere. The landlord and his wife were there. Bob and Jeannie Kiefer, of course, were there. The two patrol officers were there as well. And everyone said that they saw and they felt the same thing. Whatever was happening wasn't obeying the laws of physics, and it was giving everyone an eerie, unnatural feeling. Officer Bowsen had called out a fellow patrolman, Officer Walbert, hoping that maybe he could offer some kind of sound reasoning as to what was happening. But of course, he couldn't make any sense of it either. And as he was standing there, talking to Officer Bowsen, he too watched this water defy gravity.
We were standing just inside the front door and saw this droplet of water traveling horizontally. It passed between us and just traveled out into the next room.
So, completely perplexed, the officers decided that they needed to go back to the station and get the chief of police and see if maybe he could make some sense of things. After they left, Donnie kind of came out of his trance, and Bob thought that, well, maybe it would be a good idea if they all stepped out of the house for a bit. So he took Jeannie and Donnie across the street to the pizzeria while the landlord and his wife stayed behind and waited for the police to return. The landlord later said that almost as soon as Bob, Jeannie, and Donnie walked out of the front door, the rain stopped. Creepy, isn't it? Well, when Bob, Donnie, and Jeannie got to the pizzeria, it was as if this strange water phenomenon followed them. They all went inside and sat down. Then the business owner, a lady named Pam Scrofano, came out to greet them. And do you remember when I said that Donnie kind of came out of his trance?
I was looking at Donnie. He was like in a trance, you know. He would look at you, but not know that you were there. I said to Jeannie, I said, you know, he's got to be possessed. We're sitting there, and a couple seconds later, there's water all over the pizzeria, too. I've never seen anything like that happen in my life. So I went to the cash register. I had a crucifix there. I took it out, put it on him, And the minute I put it on him, touched the skin, he got burned. The cross burned him. There's no way that anybody could have played a joke like that. This was real.
Not exactly sure why this was happening, but starting to think that maybe it was somehow connected to Donnie and not wanting to spread this problem to the pizzeria, Bob took Jeannie and Donnie back to the house. And when they walked inside, they saw that it wasn't raining anymore. And at first, Bob breathed a sigh of relief. But as soon as they walked in, Donnie went over and sat down on the couch. And when he did, his trance intensified and he once again became unresponsive. And at that very moment, it started raining again. Donnie later said that even though he was in this trance, he could still tell that everyone was looking at him as if he was the cause of this whole thing. And at one point, the two ladies, the landlord's wife and Bob's wife, went over to Donnie and they shook him. And they started demanding that he tell them why this was happening. Donnie said that he could hear them yelling and it added to his anxiety, but he felt as if he were a million miles away. And even if he could answer, he said that he had no idea what to say. He had no more of a clue of why this was happening than they did. But maybe shaking and yelling at him wasn't the wisest thing to do, because while they were demanding these answers, the pots and pans in the kitchen began to vibrate, and this vibration intensified. Before long, the pots and pans were clanging so loudly that they could be heard all over the house. And then, suddenly, as reported by everyone there, now, check this out. Donnie somehow levitated into the air and then was violently thrown backward. He slammed hard into the wall and then fell to the floor.
It was just beyond belief. I was scared to death. It just flung him back. He went 5-6 feet, then bam, down on the floor.
But the landlord later said in an interview that there was no doubt in his mind that at that moment, he was in the presence of evil. Being flung across the room and slammed into the wall jolted Donnie out of his trance, and when it did, he noticed that he had 3 more slash marks in his arm. Shortly after this, the 2 officers returned with the police chief, Chief Roberts, and then everyone looked to him for the answers. Perhaps feeling as if he were on the spot, and in spite of the fact that he was standing right smack dab in the middle of all of this raining water, he denied that anything paranormal was happening. He took one look around and he said that this was not a police matter and that Bob needed to call a plumber. And then he and the 2 officers left. Up to this point, it looked as if this strange phenomenon was happening to Donnie and that he had no control over it. But after he returned to prison, that would change. By the next morning, this mysterious rain had stopped, and Donnie was scheduled to report back to prison to finish his sentence. He checked in, and he was taken to his cell. But his ordeal was far from over. The shift supervisor was a man named Dave Keenhold, and even though he had no idea of what had taken place at the Keevers' residence the night before, he said that the entire atmosphere surrounding Donnie that day was, as he put it, just eerie. He said that there was an evil presence all over Donnie, and he believed that something supernatural was there. Now, the interesting thing about that, of course, was that he wasn't at the Keevers' house the night before, so he had no knowledge of this seemingly paranormal activity that had taken place. Shortly after Donnie was taken into his cell, it started raining inside the cell.
The water was all over his cell. Water was going horizontal, vertical, climbing up the walls, defying the laws of gravity.
It got so bad that Donnie's cellmates started screaming to be let out and taken away from Donnie.
After that, we had to move him and put him in a different cell block and house him alone.
At some point during this bizarre event, Donnie said that he started to feel as if he were slowly gaining some type of control over this mysterious power. And according to Donnie, at one point, 2 guards asked him if he could make it rain on the supervisor, Dave Keenhold, and Donnie said that he would try. So he closed his eyes and he started to meditate. And he said as he did, he began to feel connected to this evilness that was inside of him. And then he focused all of his energy into a single finger snap. Right around that time, maybe that exact time, Mr. Keenhold said that he experienced something unexplainable.
We just finished with the evening meal and I had a lot of paperwork to do. And I started to write some reports. I looked down and right here on the center of my chest, it was all wet. I knew that it was Donald Decker.
This event was so real and it affected Keenhold so severely that he felt that the only answer was to have an exorcism performed on Donnie. After Supervisor Keenhold had felt that Donnie had somehow reached across the jail and made water appear on his chest, Donnie was taken into a room with Reverend Blackburn, the jail chaplain.
I met the priest. He told me he was going to perform an exorcism to get rid of whatever was around me, whatever was causing all of these bad things. He grabbed my hand, and then he started reading from the Bible. And then this real strong odor came into the room. The more the priest talked, the stronger the odor got, like rotting flesh. All of a sudden, it started raining. I never saw the liquid as intense as it was in that room. Water wasn't hitting me. It was just attacking him, but it would never hit the Bible. The priest was talking very, very loudly, screaming at whatever was inside of me. The odor was becoming intense. I smelled death.
According to several witnesses at the jail, once Donnie re-emerged from that room, the feeling of evilness that had surrounded him was gone, and it never did again mysteriously rain around Donnie. Ironically, and we definitely have to share this part, in October of 2012, Donnie Decker, the Rainmaker, turned himself in for setting fire to Dana's restaurant and tavern in Tobyhanna, Pennsylvania. Apparently, he had been hired by somebody who wanted that business out of the way. In the winter of 2013, Skeptic magazine published an article titled "The Devil and Donnie Decker, the Rainboy Poltergeist Case Solved." In the article, it reminds us that the chief of police, Chief Roberts, didn't believe that there was anything supernatural happening at the house. And it also talks about some inconsistencies in witness statements. And then it suggests that this whole thing just might have been a case of mass delusion. See, 2 weeks before this water incident at the Kiefer's home, on February 11, 1983, there was a record snowfall in Pennsylvania. Then, for 9 days, from the 14th to the 25th, daytime temperatures were well above freezing, and several of those nights, the temperature again dropped severely. So, with the temperatures going up and down like this, an effect called ice damming might have been created. Skeptics say that this effect could have caused the water to come out of the attic and run down the walls at the Kiefer's home, the pizzeria, and the jailhouse. Perhaps Donnie's anxiety over his grandfather and this strange water effect got into everyone's minds and it made them see things that weren't really happening. Although this might sound pretty good at first, it isn't quite satisfying, is it? To say that police officers only thought that they saw water defying the laws of physics, or they were in some way lying, that's a big charge. And when we think about everyone involved, Bob and Jeannie, the landlord and his wife, the pizzeria owner, the police officers, the guards at the jail, well, were all of these people confused? Maybe. But then there's the big one. The landlord and his wife and Bob and Jeannie all swore that they watched as Donnie was levitated off of the floor and thrown across the room. Mass delusion. Can't account for that. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that I believe this account. I'm just sharing the report. Amy found some information on ancient spirits that supposedly have control over water.
What? Before we even uploaded, we have no views?
It's ridiculous. I don't know what's going on. So, what are you going to share today?
Well, I came across this man in the 1500s named Paracelsus. Now, Paracelsus was a doctor. He was an alchemist. He's actually known as the father of toxicology, and also for his pioneering work in using minerals and chemicals in medicine. He was also a philosopher in the German Renaissance. And he wanted to find out what was behind the major elements: earth, air, water, and fire. Okay.
Right.
And so he went and he studied like a madman. He literally traveled the world. He talked to other philosophers. He read books, all kinds of stuff. And, like I just mentioned, he knew about minerals and chemicals. So I would say this man's very well versed. Okay.
Right. Yeah.
So he wrote his theories on what these were. He has referenced them as nature elementals, which I thought was really cool.
Yeah.
Also nature spirits. But I just want to talk about the water one, obviously, because we talked about water a lot in this episode.
Right.
Well, he called these water spirits, water elementals, undines. Okay. And the undines,
So how do you spell that?
Undines.
Okay, because I thought at first you said undones.
Oh,
Like they're going to be your undoing.
well, I guess they could be.
No. Okay, come on. Sorry.
Right. So he wrote about how they are at the core, right? They are water, they are made of water, and they control water. Very interesting, right?
Yes.
However, they also, he said, can take on a corporeal essence, right? And their corporeal essence is human. So they can have this kind of vaporous spirit type of form, but also a human form.
Right.
Yeah, I found
Wow.
that very interesting. And this one took me down another rabbit hole. Undines, of course, have basically reign over all of the water, right? Lakes, streams, rivers. And he said at waterfalls, occasionally, a person will feel an undine reach through the waterfall and touch them.
Wow.
I was like, whoa. But
Wow.
now I actually want to go visit more waterfalls.
Me too.
Right. Yeah. So I thought that was very interesting. He said also the elementals can get into arguments, tiffs, right? And so that would explain if the elementals are the water elementals are super ticked off at the earth elementals.
Yeah.
Well, maybe they create a tsunaami.
Wow.
Right? Like, well, we'll take you out for a minute and show you who's boss.
So I
Yeah.
have to ask you this then. Are these undines,
Yes.
are they conscious? Can they deliberately, do they have intention? They can deliberately get involved and,
Right.
mess up your world?
So yes, they can literally get involved. They do have intention. However, he did say they are not immortal. So if when 4,000, 5,000 years, and Undine is I guess finished, then they return back to the source of water and are replaced with another spiritual Undine being.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah.
So then what do you think about this account? Do you think that something happened here? I mean, it's interesting to me because I watched some interviews because I looked over your shoulder.
Mhm.
I watched some interviews of Donnie Decker,
Mhm.
and he doesn't really come across to me as the kind of person that would fabricate a hoax. So what do you think happened here?
I think so. I think something happened. I think it really stems on that rage that he felt, that, all of a sudden he is just overwhelmed with rage and something wells up inside of him. Maybe it was a force, spirit, evil, I don't know. But I think all of that energy had to go somewhere.
Yeah.
And that's where we saw all of these instances of water.
Yeah.
The police, their description of what happened seemed extremely genuine. I mean, I think in one point they even went and got the chief of police and was like, look, you need to come and see this. Something's going on here.
Yeah.
So I definitely think something happened. And I think it all stemmed from that moment of rage. He felt like my whole world is shattered because this is the reality that I saw in Grandpa. And here's what you're all saying about him.
Yeah.
And it just manifested.
That's interesting. All right. Well, thank you again.
You're welcome.
This case was just baffling to me because it was so different from many of the other reports we have done. Before this case, I had never heard of water being associated with evil. So as Amy was sharing all of this with me, I had no reference points. But it did remind me of what happened to Robert Larson. In 2014, he stayed the night in a supposed haunted house in Iowa. This particular house had been the scene of a horrific family massacre, and the perpetrator was never caught. So Robert Larson thought that it would be a good idea to provoke the killer's ghost to attack him. Well, before morning, Robert Larson had been stabbed in the chest. The investigator in that account, just like the chief of police in this one, thought that nothing supernatural had happened. The chief of police in this report, of course, said that Bob needed to call a plumber. The investigator in that report believed that Robert Larson had stabbed himself. The interesting thing about that was the stab was so severe, Robert Larson had to be airlifted to the hospital. We did a complete report on that case, and if you'd like to see it, it's here.
It always baffles me that people stay to this part of the video, but I'm glad you do because, number one, we get to thank you, and we get to thank the people whose names are behind us, so we appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much.